Hello, welcome to this film, which is going to be talking you through an model answer to question 4 of the higher tier English paper from AQA. Question 4 is one that always tends to cause people probably the most problems. It's the one that people find most difficult, I think. So probably worth looking at a decent go at it and seeing what's good about the model answer. Right, question 4, as I hope you know, looks something like this. You're going to compare two texts, one of which you've chosen. Compare the ways in which language is used for effect in the two texts. Give some examples and analyse what the effects are. And it's worth 16 marks. Now I think it's usually very similar wording to that. It might say compare the ways in which language is used to do something. So it might be in which language is used to describe or to persuade or something like that. This example was quite open. It was just the way language is used for effect. I won't go on about the question too much though, because you can watch the other video on Charwell Online about that if you haven't watched that already on youtube.com/charwellonline. It is worth realising though that in order to do this question well, it's not just a case of looking at some model answers and being told how to do it. You've got to bring knowledge to this question. So what is it that you've got to know? What have you got to understand? Well, three things, I think. First of all, you've got to understand what is meant by when we say, how does a writer use language? Sometimes people don't get their head around that, but you absolutely must understand that that means what sort of techniques does the writer use. It doesn't mean what are they saying so much, it's more looking at the style and the techniques that the writer is using. Now, in order to understand that, you've got to know a range of language techniques. You've got to know and be able to recognise emotive language, alliteration, metaphor, rhetorical devices, all that sort of stuff. Because if you don't, you're never going to be able to answer this question adequately. And finally, you're going to have to understand how to do a comparative analysis. How to construct a comparative analysis, which basically means you need to know what a decent paragraph looks like, how to analyse quotations well, and how to do that in a way which is comparative, which compares the two texts. Now, I guess there's two main ways that we talk about at school in terms of how to actually construct, how to write the paragraphs. One is to use PEE+, which lots of you will have heard of. Make your point, give your evidence, explain it, and then try and explain it some more. Try and develop that explanation. And if you want to know more about that, then look at the videos on Charwell Online about how to do PEE+. The other one that you may be interested in is called TP, which is a way of looking at it in terms of technique, evidence, purpose, and effect. Technique, evidence, purpose, and effect. Now, when you look at these two approaches alongside each other, PEE+ or TP, they're the same really. They both achieve the same effects. They're both about making a clear kind of point at the beginning, but TP brings your attention to starting with a technique, making sure that your opening line is focused on a technique, not on sort of the content of the text. And it also helps you, I think, thinking about TP with your explanation, because it helps you think about purpose and effect, and I'll show you what that means as we go through the model answer. So just to give it a little bit of context, this answer comes from the 2012 June paper, which had the text Saved, which was a story about two survivors from a plane crash, and also the one I've used is the Chilean miners newspaper report. If you want to get those ones, ask your teacher and they'll be able to sort you out with the copies of the texts. Right then, so in as simple terms as possible, let's have a look at a model answer and let's see if we can work out why it's successful. I have to say at the beginning, this is only one part of the model answer. This is one section looking at one language technique. I think you'd need to do this 3 times really to get up to the sort of full marks. Right, it begins like this. Both texts 2 and 3 use strong, vivid language, but for different effects. Now that's a good opening sentence because it brings attention to 2 things. One, it tells you what technique they're going to be writing about, and that is strong, vivid language. Vivid meaning language which really makes it come alive. And it's also comparative from the start, using the word both. Okay, that's not really start of your PE or your TP. That's just a sentence to open your kind of overall section. In text 3, strong language is used throughout the piece. There's your clear point or your technique. Okay, strong language is used. For example, when the pair are approaching the valley, it states that panic entered the hearts of both of them. Really good quotation, obviously showing strong language, introduced quite neatly really. When they're approaching the valley, it states that, so that's fine. This strong language helps the reader imagine their emotions more strongly. Now there, if you're following the TP model, that's the purpose of using strong language in this context. The purpose is thinking about what's it for. When we talk about effect, that asks you to be a bit more precise and think about the effect in this context. In this example, what's the effect? So purpose is a bit more general, the way I see it. Effect is exactly what does it do here. So they go on and says, it shows that they were absolutely terrified, emphasised by the strong noun panic, and this means that the reader is more likely to empathise with the characters and be gripped by the story. Okay, so what's good about that little bit of explanation? They've used purpose and effect to really develop the explanation. It's quite a precise explanation. It says they're absolutely terrified. This is good where you're going back to your quotation and picking out the key words. And this student has gone and said use of the strong noun. They've correctly identified that it's a noun, and that use of sort of technical language helps you to do sophisticated analysis. So make sure you know, particularly if you're going for the higher grades, make sure you know your nouns, adjectives, adverbs, know your parts of speech and be able to use them accurately. Know what verbs are and use that in your analysis when you're going back to explain the effects of keywords in detail. It goes on, text 2 also uses strong language in the final paragraph. Now, what's good here is the coherence of it. It's use of the word also shows that you're comparing. It shows that you're writing about the same thing, and it's still going about strong language or strong vivid language. An example where it mentions the family's fear that a media onslaught will overwhelm the men when they escape from their underground dungeon. Now, what they've done quite well there is obviously they've given clear evidence, but because all the bits they wanted weren't in the same quote directly, they've gone through and integrated a couple of small quotes into their overall analysis. So when you use a quote, it doesn't have to be one big chunk from the text. You can just go through and pick out a couple of things. And the way that students expressed it, an example is where it mentions the family's fear that a media onslaught will overwhelm the men. They're writing it into quite a neat, integrated quotation. So practice doing that and learn how to do that. As with text 3, this shows fear, but this time from the families of those involved rather than the individuals themselves. Okay, so there's a kind of neater bit of more precise analysis in terms of the comparison. It's making a precise comparison. It's saying it's similar to this, but it's also slightly different, but this time from the families rather than the individuals. Okay. Then it goes on, using the metaphor underground dungeon to describe their location is striking. It carries associations of punishment and suffering, even though the miners have done nothing wrong. As a result, the readers empathise with the miners and their families and feeling glad that they're likely to escape. Okay, now that's pretty good also, but what you need to understand is that really that paragraph in its construction is the same as the previous paragraph. There's no sort of, it's followed the same sort of similar-ish formula, and because of that, it's ticked all the boxes really. It's done everything it needs to do, which is point you towards the way it's neatly integrated the quotations, the way it's been quite precise in what it's talked about the purpose, and it's precise about talking about the effect. As a result, the readers feel this, or the readers do this, or the readers respond in this way. Okay, so overall, it's not a perfect response by any means, and to improve it, you could, although it would be a very solid start, I think, to a question 4. So it's pretty good. To do really exceptionally well, I suppose you'd be looking for things like more subtlety and sophistication in the points that you actually draw out of it and the analysis that you make, perhaps using even more sort of technical language. I think to get the highest marks you need to go beyond the obvious. This is a very solid paragraph showing how to develop a point and make a comparative analysis. To do it exceptionally well, I think you'll need to find better, more sophisticated points and really show some sort of originality and flair in the analysis that you make. But that structure is absolutely fine and what you should be aiming for. So that's it really. Hope that was of some use. As I say, make sure you know your stuff, know what the techniques you're looking for are, and know what sort of effects they have, and be willing to apply that to the text that you get in the exam. Hope it goes well.